Senator Deacon, welcome to the CDR Policy Scoop.
Thank you for inviting me, Eva.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this conversation. Unfortunately, my co-host Sebastian is not able to join today. But Canada, we've had a scoop with Canada already before with Naim Marchant, who I'm sure you know as well. But this time specifically, I understand Canada is the first country where a government has done such a deep dive on marine CDR. It's a very unique piece of work that you have been involved in as one of the senators. And I would be curious to maybe first understand, how did the Fisheries and Oceans Committee decide that marine carbon dioxide removal is something that merits this kind of very in-depth study? And can you elaborate a bit like what's behind it, and also on the process itself, because you went through a long list of hearings. Like, what surprised you the most going through this whole experience?
So there's a couple of questions in that, and for me, this study delighted me, because I'm a believer that there are ways that we can not just make the world better and fight climate change, but create industry that creates opportunities, jobs, and prosperity for folks while we fight climate change. So the idea of ocean alkalinity enhancement, or just alkalinity enhancement in particular, really appealed to me and to my colleagues because of that. It's an opportunity to deal with ocean ecology issues, with ocean acidification, and help to address and reverse that process, and to remove carbon from the atmosphere, remove past emissions from the atmosphere in a way that creates an intangible asset that we can export outside of Canada. So it's a great export asset. So that's what appealed to me. In terms of what surprised me the most was the biggest barrier. And we've very much decided that the biggest barrier was the lack of agile regulation in the space. That if we didn't have an ability to that the opportunity to scale this technology is there from a technological standpoint, from an ability to verify and have high quality carbon credits, the ability to scale to jurisdictions around the world was there. But what was, I think, the uncertainty that that is going to prevent growth of the sector is regulatory. And that is a manageable risk in our eyes. And that's probably the biggest surprise, that alone was the biggest challenge to overcome.
Yeah, and that's the trickiest one to tackle, because having been a policymaker myself in the European context for 15 years in the past, it's you always want the policy to move faster than it actually can. But I think these kind of studies, or the work that you undertook in this committee, specifically looking at marine CDR, is kind of a key step that will push things into motion, or at least I sincerely hope that will be the case. And things will never move as fast as we want it, as we want them to, but they will hopefully head in the right direction.
I'm a former entrepreneur, so things never move as quickly as I want them to move. But the reality is we need to do this in a way that is safe, that is demonstrably beneficial, so that we get the social license from communities and all the different groups that are impacted or feel like they could be impacted through the process, that social license is earned and retained over time. So it really makes the policy question, the regulatory policy question, one of the biggest ones facing our ability to take advantage of this technology.
And this study put forward 9 specific recommendations what Canada should be doing. Some of them were exactly the study, and we'll be linking to it also in our show notes so that everyone can read it in detail. 9 very clear and actionable points, which is great, because actually the way you have put it out there on the website, people don't even need to open the study. They can just see the key points, like very, very well presented. Some of them have to do with the substance, some of them have to do with process. So if you would highlight the key ones that you think will help move things forward, are these going to be the ones around policy for you?
Without question. Getting access to the compliance market is critical. So carbon removal, only carbon emission reduction has access at this point. So getting access to carbon removal credits in the compliance market, or being able to sell and trade those in the compliance market, absolutely critical. Making sure the regulations exist to have the highest quality, most defensible carbon credits. We want to have, there's an opportunity to create markets that are truly global in nature if you have the highest quality credits from end to end. And that's something that our current Prime Minister, before he was Prime Minister, spoke about in the Banking Committee. I asked him a question about this, and he said that end-to-end integrity, this is Prime Minister Mark Carney, is absolutely crucial. And that's making sure that the organizations that are buying the credits are already doing what they wanted, what they really need to do, what they have to do in terms of reduction of emissions, that they're not using this as carbon removal credits as a get out of jail free card. They're actually doing the work themselves, and making sure that the regulations exist and the environment exists for that market to thrive. And I think there's a great opportunity for Canada, particularly in the carbon removal side of things, to be a real global leader.
And you have a great foundation, because you just mentioned your current Prime Minister, Mark Carney. He's probably the most knowledgeable Prime Minister when it comes to carbon removal, with the best understanding. So Canada has a solid foundation to actually be a leader in this space. And as you mentioned that you were an entrepreneur in your previous life, I see that Canadian companies actually are doing really well when it comes to removals. For example, Frontier and Advanced Market Commitments, I think recently 41% of their funding went to Canadian companies. That is a really good sign for you, I'm sure, right?
Well, it's fantastic to think that we have now 2 X Prize winners from the Carbon Removal X Prize in Canada. Undo is moving from the United Kingdom to Canada. And the other is Planetary Technologies, a Nova Scotia-based company. I'm a Nova Scotia senator. And the other is Carbon Run, has received a good amount of money using technology that has been well proven in Scandinavia and Nova Scotia in terms of reducing acid rain, the effects of acid rain in salmon rivers in Atlantic Canada, and has been done across Scandinavia for a generation or more. So we've definitely got a strong base, and it's an area where I think we've got tremendous opportunity. But we do have, at the current time federally, 4 different regulators involved in the space. We've 4 different federal departments have a sort of finger in the pot, and to me that is the one area of significant risk. Because you get a lot of different regulators. They may be siloed, and that's very common in government. And the siloing effect will slow down decision-making, will slow down approvals once a decision-making framework is in place. So that for me, we've got a great lead the business has really impressed our committee, but the challenge we have is to make sure that we have that agility from a regulatory standpoint to earn and maintain social license. And that's evidence-based. I'll just offer one other point. Another asset we have is the Ocean Frontier Institute, based at Dalhousie University. Very much a world-leading research institute in this space. And they are studying our existing projects in Nova Scotia very heavily to look at effects in the water column, effects in sedimentation, just looking at all from a detailed standpoint. What's the evidence in terms of the changes that are occurring as a result of alkalinity enhancement? And what do we need to be concerned about? And what do we need to monitor very carefully in order to manage risk? So identifying risks and looking at ways to manage and mitigate.
Mhm. So this risk of having four different institutions involved, can you elaborate on this a bit? Because we try to be helpful with takeaways here on this podcast for policymakers in other parts of the world. And if you could elaborate which exact organizations these are, because they will probably be able to draw the parallels. Okay, these are the types that we would have in our country. And how would you ideally solve this conundrum where you do have these four institutions, but ideally things should be more streamlined? So who should be in the lead, for example, or how should it work?
So one department you would expect is Environment and Climate Change Canada. So absolutely they're there, as well as Natural Resources Canada, in charge of our forests and forest management federally on federal lands. But also involved in this particular situation is Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Treasury Board. And the Treasury Board is involved because we have an agreement on the federal government's part to buy carbon credits at a federal level as offset to in terms of military consumption of petroleum products. And so the role that they play in helping to develop a high quality carbon market in Canada is really significant. But again, we have to align what each department is doing in terms of developing protocols and managing. And one of the departments, when I asked in committee, have any of you been to see any of these proponents, these companies of the various technology? And one put their hand up very quickly and said, "Oh yes, we sent in our enforcement officers." That wasn't the answer we were looking for. We hoped they were going in to learn, not to enforce old regulations that may or may not be appropriate for the risks that need to be managed in this circumstance. So we need regulators that don't just look at risks as we have seen them, but look at risks in the context of the geoengineering that's occurring in our oceans every day through carbon emissions and carbon absorption into our ocean waters. And the other element that we need to be concerned about is what are the opportunities that might be blocked through regulation that does not prioritize unlocking opportunities. Regulators don't tend to look at that issue. What opportunities might be blocked through their regulation. And in my mind, in situations like that, it's really important that be considered, especially when you look at it in the context of the global geoengineering of our oceans that's occurring minute by minute, hour by hour, every day. So we recommended the creation of a regulatory sandbox. And the regulatory sandbox would have all of the different federal regulators and potentially provincial regulators at the table, but along with proponents, large and small, along with buyers, along with a number of other organizations that are considering all of the opportunities and risks and making sure that we have a regulatory process that is essential to earn public trust, to get that social license in place in a way that is sustainable and grows over time. And this is important to fishers, it's important to our Indigenous communities, it's important to our coastal communities. So that rigor is really essential to creating, I think, the industry overall.
And this idea or the practical solution of having such a regulatory sandbox, is this something you've seen work in practice in other areas and you would like to see it applied here? Or this is the ideal solution that you would just like to see implemented, but haven't seen in practice yet?
So about a little over a decade ago, I saw an announcement from the Financial Conduct Authority in the United Kingdom, and they created an open banking regulatory sandbox. And it was the first time I've ever heard about it. And I saw this as an entrepreneur well before I was appointed to the role of senator. And I thought, what a great idea to bring innovators and regulators closer together so that they can learn from each other. How does a regulator identify a risk? How does it meet the threshold of having a regulation put in place? How is that monitored over time and maybe evolves over time? Quite often in Canada, our regulations are stagnant. We put them in place and we keep them. And as a result, we're one of the most over-regulated countries in the OECD. We do not have an agile approach to regulation in Canada, which is really problematic, but it's a separate issue. So I saw that term, regulatory sandbox, a long time ago and was really impressed. And it was while Mark Carney was governor of the Bank of England. And so I thought, when we came to this situation, this is perfect, but as well, it is something where the government has just recently expanded the framework to have regulatory sandboxes across departments in the federal government. So a standardized framework for triggering the use of a regulatory sandbox and creating its how it functions now is going to be in place federally with the passing of the most recent budget. So that's a really positive thing.
So when could one be practically created, the first one?
I'm hoping this year. That's certainly what I'm personally hoping.
I'm sure there are people working in many different fields waiting to it. Very with big excitement.
And it has to be used very responsibly, how you choose projects, because again, this is a social license. We don't want Canadians thinking that there's a free-for-all in any sector, particularly when you're placing substances into waterways, be it a harbor or a river. You don't want Canadians thinking, what are they putting in? Is it toxic? Is it whatever? We need to have that certainty for Canadians in order to grow this industry. It's a foundational piece.
And it was your own involvement, because you're one of the senators from Nova Scotia, as you mentioned, and Planetary is active there. Did you know about their work before you got engaged in this report?
That's what's caused me to get engaged in the report.
Oh, I see.
But I learned about the companies once we started to learn about the technologies. And actually, the way I learned about it is they spread a substance, non-toxic substance, the researchers at the Ocean Frontier Institute did, to see what is the absorption area that we should be monitoring when the waterfall at this power plant, the water outflow, has an alkaline material dosed into it. Where does that dosing, how far does it spread out into the harbor? So they put in a pink substance to track that sort of area of the harbor that would be affected at the same time as the launch of the Barbie movie.
Okay,
by chance. And so that got a lot of news coverage, and I went, what's that about? Thinking, not reading enough of the articles, more capturing the image, going, what has that pink subject product got to do with the subject of carbon removal? Anyway, it had nothing to do with, it was purely a way of visually tracking the area affected by the dosing. But that's how I first learned about this one company. And the moment we got into the space, it was really very exciting. The study took considerably longer than we expected because in the midst of our study, Prime Minister Trudeau resigned. There was a leadership competition, then an election, and Prime Minister Carney was elected and formed government. So we had to restart the study. We had a whole lot of new members on our fisheries committee. So we brought back in some of the same witnesses so that the new members could get as excited about the topic as the previous members of the fisheries committee were. And there we go. We got the study published at the beginning of February, and we're all terribly excited about it. I've honestly rarely been involved in a study in my almost 8 years in the Senate that has had members as excited about a topic as this one.
Oh, that's fascinating. And you keep, mentioning the regulatory aspect of things. And when we talk about marine CDR, one of the key challenges that always pops up is the governance question, especially when it comes to oceans. Because it's just all very different compared to how we deal with different climate change solutions that are done on the land. One of the recommendations on this report is for Canada to claim sovereign jurisdiction over the regulation of land-based ocean alkalinity enhancement projects. So tell me a bit more about the reasoning behind it, and how easy do you think this will be to implement?
I think it's very easy to implement.
Yeah.
The government just needs to declare it. But you also see on page 27 of the report, you'll see a framework that speaks about the different regulatory bodies involved. And this recommendation really does flow from the London Protocol and the annual meetings of the London Protocol, where there was question brought to bear. And we're not talking about deep at this point in time, not talking about deep ocean alkalinity enhancement. We're talking about land-based. It's in a harbor or on a river, and so this is terrestrial. This is Canadian territory. So it's something that very easily declared and allows us with certainty to start building out on all land-based aspects. And it's really a declaration that Canada needs to make to bring absolute certainty to the proponents, to their investors, to the buyers of the credits, and allow the scaling to begin of these technologies. Again, with rigorous regulatory, data gathering and regulatory oversight, but not regulatory oversight based on past regulations that may or may not be helpful or effective in managing risks, but ways of looking at this risk directly associated with the technologies.
Yeah, and I think that is something probably very interesting for many other countries that have a shoreline where they could also potentially deploy different.
And you look at our shoreline in Nova Scotia alone, we have twice the shoreline of all of Brazil in Nova Scotia. So
wow.
it's Canada's got a lot of shoreline.
Yeah, that's just Nova Scotia. That's inspirational. Creating a national marine CDR strategy, do you feel that there should be a separate strategy for different types of CDR approaches?
There's no question that when you're talking about management of forests or advanced weathering that involves agricultural lands or different ways of managing what you're putting onto agricultural fields. And you're talking about ocean alkalinity enhancement. These are very, very different areas with different risks and different opportunities. So without question, we need to be looking at each one in a way that allows businesses to develop and scale promising technologies, and where we really understand the risks in a forward-looking manner, not in a retrospective manner. These are different opportunities that require a different way of thinking. So absolutely different carbon dioxide removal technologies require different regulatory regimes and a thoughtful approach that really understands how to create a market opportunity, because it's the market opportunity that will drive the investment, that will drive the innovation. And so it's that, for me, the saying that drives my work in the Senate is you can't have an innovative economy without an innovative government. It's just not possible. And as an Estonian, you appreciate that fully. I restate my envy over the digitization of your economy and how incredibly well done that has been accomplished. But there's an opportunity here for us to really lead in a space where the world needs leadership. We will never get to net zero without carbon removal. And one of the questions we addressed in the study was, carbon reduction or carbon removal, and it's not or. One of our witnesses said the time to ask that question was 30 years ago. It's now. We need both. It takes a long time. As somebody who's scaled technology, as an entrepreneur, it takes a long time to develop a technology to the point where it's scalable and safe. And so we have to just keep moving and keep doing the hard work of making sure it is safe. It's serving the needs of communities. It's earning the trust of communities and creating a viable, scalable global market opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, market opportunity, that's a big potential business case, right? That could drive all of this into action. So there is this great in-depth study. There seems to be kind of strong political buy-in, at least within the Senate, because wow, I mean, what kind of very specific recommendations we see here. What comes next? Do you see that all of these recommendations will actually be taken up and implemented?
I'm always an optimist. You have to be an optimist to be an entrepreneur. But it will require us to keep building support, to keep building awareness. And the CDR Policy Scoop podcast that you do is a really important part of bringing that attention, bringing that global recognition to help us to keep pushing government to move in the directions that we believe are essential. They may have good reasons why they can't move in certain ways, but we haven't found them yet. We had a lot of great witnesses from around the globe. So at this point in time, our committee doesn't see the reasons for pushback. I don't want talking points in response. I don't think any of us want talking points in response. What we want are evidence-based answers that say, yes, this can be done, but we need this amount of time because there's these other elements that have to be put in place. Or no, we can't because of these reasons, but we'll consider something else to address that problem. To me, those are the sorts of answers that I think we're looking for.
Before we close, I want to touch upon the social license because you highlighted it so many times over this conversation. You've now seen, or you've basically been through almost 2 rounds of witness statements in the Senate, right? And you have seen new senators coming in and basically getting that buy-in through the learnings that they do. What have you seen being the most impactful in terms of getting people to understand what it actually is, why do we need marine CDR and why we should be doing it and why that's actually a good thing?
The most impactful thing was site visits. My colleagues who made site visits came away having to talk about that site visit.
Important.
Like seeing what's going on, seeing the thoughtfulness that's going into every step, seeing the detail of being able to qualify for isometric or other validation techniques for the removal of carbon. It absolutely mind-blowing, in my opinion. Meeting with the scientists at the Ocean Frontier Institute and hearing about their global expertise and how they bring in international colleagues to be part of. This is another important point that I haven't mentioned, is we can't study the risks in ways that are relevant if we don't scale the technologies in a way that is relevant. So, it's essential that we keep moving and keep growing and keep studying as we keep growing and keep scaling these technologies. Otherwise, we'll never make progress. And, there's concerns that, okay, you've studied in these different types of species and validated that there's no effect there. But what about all these other species of fish? In my mind, the only way you can do that is over time. So you have it in your early assessments, you found no risk, you found no negative impact. In fact, there's been in the salmon streams in Scandinavia and Nova Scotia, there's been huge beneficial impact over time. 10-fold increases in the populations of salmon in rivers because of having a river that's more habitable to the salmon as they grow through their life cycle. So I mean, there's a great opportunity to assess risks and assess opportunities as you scale the technology. If you just keep it in tiny little pilot studies here and there, you can't do the same level of research. It's not the same opportunity for the researchers. So to me, there's a real opportunity to keep, to have both grow together and have regulators as part of that, but not in a way that they're sending enforcement officers, in a way that they're sending their policy people, the senior political leadership, to understand how we can capture the opportunity and manage whatever risks that emerge based on the evidence.
Yeah, great. We are at time, so I would like to thank you so much for sharing all these insights. Very actionable points for, I think, policymakers in many parts of the world who should also be looking at marine CDR, but most of them probably haven't really gotten around to understanding much about that. Who knows? You might get visitors from other parts of the world now that they all know that
they're welcome to come any time of the year, but we definitely recommend summer.
Yes, visit Nova Scotia in the summer. Good place. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for all the work. Thank you for the passion that I see you're putting into exploring this and standing for these carbon removal solutions. So thanks so much. And wishing you all the best in getting all these recommendations also implemented.
Thank you, Eva, for your interest. Really grateful and grateful for all the work that you and Sebastian Manhart do. Thank you.
Thank you.